Hello everyone, and thank you very much for your time on a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate it. My name's Alistair, I'm from the Portman Group, and what I'm going to do this afternoon is talk very briefly about who the Portman Group are, the function we have within the alcohol industry, and I've got a couple of case studies of drinks that have come in front of our independent complaints panel. And I thought what would be quite helpful is to look at what those drinks got right and what those drinks slipped up on when it came to compliance with the Portman Group's Code of Practice. And then finally, I'll talk about the advisory service that we have. Obviously, we have a Code of Practice that we operate, but we're keen to do everything we can to help the industry to comply with the rules and regulations. So we have a free advisory service that's there to help marketers make sure that their marketing is correct before it goes on sale. Okay. So the Portman Group was founded nearly 30 years ago, and it's the self-regulatory body for the alcohol industry. It is funded by 8 member companies, some of the biggest players in the market, so Diageo, Heineken, Carlsberg, Pernod Ricard, and others. Our job is to set the standards for marketing in the UK. So we do that by operating a code of practice, and this code of practice applies to all drinks that are on sale in the UK. We do everything we can to try and help the industry comply with those rules. So as well as offering the free advice that I mentioned, we have training opportunities for people so we can come into your places of work and train your staff in the codes and the guidance documents around those. As I said, our company is funded by member companies, but we also have what's called code signatories. And code signatories are everyone from producers to agencies, wholesalers, distributors, and they have signed an undertaking to support the codes of practice. So they will adhere to the decisions that are made by our complaints panel and also just support the concept of responsible drinking and social responsibility. What I would say is I'd really encourage everyone in this room to sign up to be a code signatory. It's free of charge, and it basically gives you a voice within the industry at our regular forums. Should a producer be unlucky enough to be subject to a complaint, and should that complaint be upheld by our panel, then we've got a couple of sanctions up our sleeves. The first is negative publicity, because no one wants their brand to be embarrassed in the grocer or the other drinks business and so on. And also we've got what's called retailer alert bulletins, where we can, if it's appropriate, send out a bulletin to the supermarkets and the off-licenses and so on, asking drinks not to be sold until the packaging has been amended. We think that's a fair way to allow people to tweak their packaging rather than actually have to do things like bans or things like that. Okay. So how do we fit into the marketplace with the other regulatory bodies? Our job is solely marketing. So it's the naming of drinks, it's the labelling and the packaging of drinks, and it's the promotion of drinks in things like posters, tent cards, pump clips, and so on. We used to do quite a lot of editorial content and websites, but that responsibility is passed on to the ASA these days. So the ASA's responsibility is any marketing that's in third-party space that's paid for by the advertiser. So the ASA's responsibility is TV, cinema, press, and increasingly, of course, social media and online. The FSA's responsibility is the legal, so that's the all that, of course, you know all this, the ABV, the allergens, the country of origin, and so on. So these are the 12 individual rules of our code of practice. And recently, we updated the code after a period of consultation last year. The 6th edition of the code of practice, it was released in March. And there's one big change which I think is very important, and that is the introduction of a new rule on serious or widespread offence. Historically, the code was introduced as a way to try to prohibit people harming themselves or others through alcohol. But what I think we realised through the consultation was that people these days are just as interested in marketing affecting the concept of people's identity or their sense of self. So we've introduced a new rule to allow people to complain about any kind of issues under the protected characteristics of the Equality Act. Okay. But what I'll do today, I thought I would look at the two rules that get complained about more than others, because I think it's pretty quite useful to see the sort of things that the great British public get really offended by, and you can see kind of where the panel's opinions are quite generally. Okay. So historically, I think even since the code was introduced, there are two rules that get complained about more than any other. First one is alcoholic content. Is it clear that an alcoholic drink is an alcoholic drink and not a soft drink or something else? Does a drink have a particular appeal to under 18s? This was really at the root of why the Portman Group's code was founded all those years ago. That fear that alcohol marketing could in some way be encouraging young people or children to try alcohol. So we get about 3 to 4 times as many complaints citing that rule about appeal to kids as any other, and it's always been that way. So I'll look at those two. So I'll just break down these two rules in a bit more detail. The first rule about alcoholic content, it says that it must be communicated on the packaging with absolute clarity. And what that means is not that it has to say the word gin in huge letters on the front, but it just has to be clear to someone if they pick up the bottle or can that on first glance, nice and easily, they can tell simply that it's an alcoholic drink. And on particular appeal to under 18s, the word particular is really important because we're not saying that anything that's colourful or fun or uses illustrations is problematic, because of course it's not. Adults enjoy colours and illustrations as much as anyone else. But the key thing is, does something about that marketing have this disproportionate appeal to children than it would do to an adult? So we'll go through the case studies and then just see where the line is. So this is the first example case, and as you can see, it's about a gin liqueur, and I think it's probably worth saying up front that we have had, I think, between about 7 and 8 complaints this year about gin liqueurs. We're seeing very few complaints about gins, but gin liqueurs are the area where we're seeing people making complaints about drinks. So this is quite a typical case, I think, so I thought I'd go through this in some detail. So as you can see, that the complainant wrote to the Portman Group, and they said that they thought the pink liquid and the label of the cartoon, pictures of the pugs on the drink, was too appealing to children. I'm not sure if you can see it in great detail there, but what you've got is 3 pugs in a hot air balloon above a kind of sort of fantasy land. And of course, the two things that the complainants pulled out is the fact that it's pink, and also that the fact it's got animals on it. They think this is going to have this disproportionate appeal to children. So 2 questions for the panel. They looked at it, whether it had this particular appeal to kids, but they also brought in and looked at it under this rule about absolute clarity of alcoholic content as well. So when they were looking at this, the first question, is it clear that it actually is an alcoholic drink, or could it be mistaken for a soft drink or a fruit drink? When they were looking at this, what they do is they break down the packaging into elements. First and foremost, they looked at the fact it was in a traditional alcohol bottle. So they thought that cue would go a long way to tell the consumer that the drink was alcoholic. They also noted that there were lots of other cues on the labelling which would then tell the consumer it was alcoholic too. So clear reference to gin liqueur on the front label, as well as the ABV, so that's nice and prominent. You can see it on first glance when you pick up the bottle. And then turning the bottle round, they saw that, again, another reference to the gin liqueur, unit content, health messaging on the labelling as well. And, of course, a responsible drinking, and then a pregnancy warning too. So taking all those things into account, they thought despite the fact that it was pink, despite the fact it had pugs on it, the average consumer would be able to tell in a straightforward way that this was an alcoholic drink. I think it's the thing I took away from this decision is that the colour of the liquid doesn't have to be an issue under this rule. You can have whatever colour liquid you want, and as you should do. It's all about how the labelling is done. So, second part of the decision for the panel, does it have this particular appeal to under 18s? Well, of course, there's lots of elements on this label. The complainant mentioned that the liquid was pink. They noted that there are 3 cartoon dogs in a hot air balloon floating above this, what they described as a Willy Wonka-style land. You've got lollipop trees, things like that. On the back, you can see it's got a reference to evoking memories of your childhood. So, going through each of an individual piece, the panel didn't think that any of them individually were necessarily problematic. So, calling the drink Pugalicious, they thought that would be as appealing to an adult as it would be to a child. Pink, that appeals as much to adults as it does to children too. But it was the fact that they were each element was in combination here. So the fact that you had anthropomorphic pugs, it wasn't a sort of social realist version of a dog. It was cartoon, living dogs with kind of quite cheeky looks on their faces. They're in a hot air balloon, so they're active in the illustration. And of course, they're floating over something which is, of course, sweet, very appealing to children. So at that point, they thought because it was in a pink, so the bottle was pink, all of those individual elements combined made this particularly appealing to children. So they upheld that part of the complaint. So as far as the panel was concerned, despite that first rule not being upheld, the second part of it was. So this drink was found to be in breach of the code. A very, very recent decision. I guess people are aware of this one. Have you seen it around? Yeah. So Unicorn Tears, very recent decision made by the complaints panel. But again, it has a lot of similarities with the pugs. The complainant saw this on sale in John Lewis, and they thought it had a particular appeal to children, which they thought made it breach the code. Again, the panel had the same sort of decision to make. Is it clear? Is it a soft drink or is it an alcoholic drink? And their view was very similar to the 3 pugs, that again the bottle did a lot of the work to tell you it's alcoholic, and there were nice clear references to both gin liqueur and the ABV on the front of the packaging. Again, like 3 pugs, it had the CMO guidelines and responsible drinking messaging on the back too. So with that in combination, they thought it had done enough to comply with the code. When it came to looking at under the rule on under 18s, again, it was all about the illustration. Does this illustration of a unicorn have this strong appeal to children? And their view was that unicorns generally have got broad appeal, and they've seen images of unicorns done in a way that is quite mature and quite grown up. But in this case, they thought that this sort of illustration was right out of the cartoon that kids would watch, or the sort of colouring books or storybooks that very young children would have, because of those very thick black outlines around the shape of the unicorn. The way the words unicorn tears, that was also considered to be a problem for the panel because, again, it was quite childlike, it was quite thick black drawings, the sort of things that you would see in children's books. So with those 3 things in combination, they thought this one was particularly appealing to kids. What they can also do when the panel have a complaint, they can also bring in other code rules if they think they're relevant. So in this case, they brought in the rule on therapeutic effect. The rule on therapeutic effect says that you shouldn't say that a drink is going to pick you up or calm you down or change your mood or behaviour. And in this case, on the back of the packaging, it had the claim that you could consume this mythical spirit and that you should enjoy the magic responsibly. The panel got that this was light-hearted and quite tongue-in-cheek, but nevertheless, they took quite a dim view of it, and they thought that it was encouraging people to think that it could in some way change your behaviour. So under that rule, it was upheld also. So there's 4 key takeaways that I'd love to pass on. First and foremost, if your marketing complies with the food information regulations, it's very likely to comply with the rule on alcoholic content. So if the ABV is on the front of the packaging, or at least in easy access for the consumer, if it says what type of spirit it is, that's going to make it comply with that rule. So those 2 things in combination usually mean that a drink will comply with this rule. If there's anything busy on the label, so illustrations, colours, anything unexpected that you wouldn't expect to see on alcohol, that's when the bottle may have to come into, or can may have to come into effect to, again, reinforce to the consumer that it's going to be alcoholic. And as I say, if they're busy, that packaging may need to work at that a little bit harder to tell you it's alcoholic. And I've got a couple of examples to show you on that. So very generally, on appeal to kids, this is the sort of thing that comes up repeatedly. I mentioned that the pugs were found to be problematic because they were anthropomorphic. And what we found when we did research into this is that, of course, children love cartoons and they love animals, but what they really love are anthropomorphized animals, because that's just the sort of thing that they see in their books and their cartoons. My 4-year-old's books and cartoons, they're just full of anthropomorphized animals. So something like this cartoon snake, especially one wearing sunglasses, that's even more appealing. This was considered by the panel to have this particular appeal. But what we found is that if kids really like illustrations and cartoons, what they really love are the kinds of drawings that they themselves would have drawn. So in this case, against Laverstoke Park Farm, what happened here is that a farmer had asked his 8-year-old to do an illustration, and that illustration was then used on the eggs and the milk and the bread and all the other things that they sold on the farm. It was when the farmer then used that same image on the beer that someone complained, saying this would have this appeal to children. So this one was caught by that rule and upheld. And of course, childish names, again, for the same reason as the anthropomorphized animals, childish names will have, of course, a big appeal to kids, because that's the sort of thing they get in their books. And toilet humour, of course, if anyone knows any children or has ever been one, toilet humour is still literally the funniest thing in the entire world. So this whole range of beers all used nice, filthy language like this, and that was caught by this rule as well for having this particular appeal to kids. But I want to make really clear that we're not saying that all illustrations are a problem or all cartoons are a problem, because I think the audience and the marketplace is a bit more sophisticated than that. Here are some examples of drinks that haven't been found to be in breach of the code. The case Pernod Ricard's Absolute London, what they'd done is they'd commissioned Jamie Hewlett, the artist behind the Gorillaz, to do a special London edition of Absolute. And the panel thought this was okay because the illustration style was quite dark, it was quite edgy, quite sinister in some ways. And for that reason, they thought that it would have as much appeal to a 20 or 30-year-old as it would to a 10-year-old. So that wasn't found to be problematic. And for the same reason, the case against Gamma Ray by Beavertown was found to be not a problem under this rule because, again, it's quite dark, it's quite mature, it's quite sci-fi, and of course it's quite violent as well. So they didn't think that this would have this appeal to children. One takeaway, though, I think, is that when Beavertown were making their case for their drink, they were saying that they based their illustration style on the sort of 1950s or 1960s cartoons that people would have enjoyed back then. And actually, it wouldn't have this appeal to kids because kids don't like that sort of 1950s retro-style cartoon. But the panel, I don't know, they weren't particularly sure on that. So I think our advice around this is that if you are using illustrations that would appeal to the inner child in a 50-year-old, there is a risk that it could just appeal to children today as well. But in the Beavertown case, they thought that wasn't a case there. And with the Ginposium, very similar to the Beavertown case here, in that you've got these sort of Star Wars style figures. And when the panel looked into this, they thought Star Wars has got very broad appeal across different age groups. And so you can't say that it's going to have this disproportionate appeal to a child, unlike an adult. And they also thought, because of these Star Wars style characters, they weren't specifically Star Wars, and they didn't look exactly like the kind of characters that are seen in the new films, so the ones seen by children. So just finally, we would love to be able to do everything we can to support you in your work and to make sure that you can put your drinks out onto the market without that fear that a complainant is going to take offence or take an issue with that drink. So we have the free advisory service. We have someone on the end of a phone or on the end of an email address, and they can get back to you within 48 hours about any part of your marketing. It could be the name of a new drink, it could be a new claim or a new type of promotion, but they'll get back to you for free and give you that reassurance that it's likely to be okay, even if a complaint does come into the panel. So please do use them, because they're very friendly and they're very happy to hear from you. So that is me. If there's anything I can help with, please just email me at the address above. We have regular updates and news articles which we'd love to keep you in touch with, so you could keep in touch with the decisions made by the complaints panel, as well as changes to the code of practice and so on. The new code of practice has been launched, but it doesn't come into full effect until September. So we can update you about when the new code goes live and keep you updated with all things happening within the industry. Okay. Please do sign up as well to become code signatories, because to be a code signatory gives you a seat at the table. It allows you to join our code signatory forum, and again, we can keep talking about how we can help.